Hello guys, so this may be the most important video that you'll watch on your journey to growth, and this video is going to be about CAC and LTV, and these are the only two metrics, to be very honest, that matter when it comes to scaling a business or understanding the growth chart of a business if you're doing analysis, or putting a strategy in place by reviewing a business or a startup. And the only two metrics are CAC and LTV, and this is the cost of the customer acquisition and the lifetime value of the customer. So let's deep dive into these two metrics today, and we're going to explore some of the concerns that I have in terms of the common issues that startups and businesses face or miscalculations that they do, and also some notes to keep in mind of, and also explanation of all of these metrics in detail. So let's start with CAC first of all. CAC is the cost of acquiring a customer, which is all of your sales and marketing costs divided by the number of customers that you have. Sounds very straightforward, but when you deep dive into it, you realize there's a lot of more depth into it. So the first thing is, sometimes the cost of customer acquisition, you might confuse this as your ad spend. So it's not your ad spend, okay? It is your ad spend, but it's also the cost that you pay to the agency who's managing the ad spend. Or if you have a person in-house who's managing the ads, what are the salaries of those people? If you also need to involve a sales process where people need to call these leads, then what are the salaries of those salespeople? If you are using a video on your top of funnel ads, let's say, and you have to get that video edited, you have to outsource that, let's say on Upwork, to a freelancer, how much does it cost to edit that video, right? All of those costs have to be included when you calculate the cost of acquiring the customer. So how much money did you spend? Divided by the number of customers that you gotten. Now, since we are talking about this ratio, there are two metrics in play. We will have to put a time constraint on it. So let's say 12 months, 6 months, we'll have to give it a timeline. So let's say we give it a timeline of 12 months. How much did you spend in 12 months on all of these sales and marketing efforts, including your ad spend, including your salaries, including these design, content edits, video edits, all of that stuff, divided by how many customers did you get in those 12 months? That will become your CAC for that particular 12-month period. So there's no CAC as such, it's CAC for a specific time period. So when you go to a startup and say, what's your CAC? They might just answer you $5, but is it for 3 months? Is it for 6 months? Is it for 12 months? Again, if we deep dive into this, the way that startups calculate this, they might come into different buckets. So one could be an entrepreneur saying, hey, this is the entire amount of money I spent, and this is the number of customers I have in my business. Versus if you speak to a digital marketing manager in that business or in that startup, they may not know a lot of costs associated with the overall business. So let's say the entrepreneur is spending $1,000. The digital marketing manager might be aware of only $800 of those dollars, because those $200, let's say the entrepreneur is paying to an accountant, to a CA, to things where the digital marketer may not be aware. So the digital marketer may not include a lot of extra costs into the business. Of course, there are different expenses that a business has. We're not talking about expenses which are non-sales and marketing. But then there is a fully loaded CAC. And then there is a marketing version of the CAC as well. So a fully loaded CAC includes all the costs. So it goes into salaries and all of that stuff. But if you don't want to tell your digital marketer what the salaries are, maybe as an entrepreneur, you have not disclosed that to your digital marketing manager, then the marketing manager will only include the costs that they are aware of, which is ad spend, maybe freelancers that they hired themselves, but they may not know the salaries of all those people. They might include their own salaries for that matter. So there are a lot of these confusions. So if you really want to accurately calculate, you obviously don't have to include like accounting, legal, blah, 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 but you have to include all of the costs, including the salaries, including the payments, including the freelancers, including the ad spend, all of the costs associated with sales and marketing of that period, and then divided by the number of customers. Now, obviously, when you're giving a time period, it's a metric which is going to change over time. So you'll have to do something called cohort analysis. Now, how cohort analysis works is, a cohort is the people that you get in your funnel, the customers that you acquire during a specific time period. So it could be a monthly cohort. Let's say this cohort, which I got last month, which is the month of September, for example, these customers had a CAC of XYZ. So it's going to be the CAC for those 30 days for the customers acquired in September. Then the CAC for October could be different. So you'll have to do a cohort analysis, because let's say you're making experiments let's say you're doing CRO experiments on your website on a month-on-month basis. So you decide to run certain experiments in September. So you'll have to do a cohort analysis of September, because if those experiments worked, then your conversion rate would have been better. That means more traffic from your website would convert into customers, and hence your CAC would be lower. So the cohort analysis for September could give you a different number than the cohort for October. So every cohort will have different numbers. So do a cohort analysis. Typically I do it on a 30-day basis. But if someone is asking me as an investor coming to my startup and asking me what's your CAC, I'm going to give them like a 6-month number or a 12-month number. But for my marketing team, I like to do a monthly cohort analysis. Now, what are the methods that can improve your cost of customer acquisition? You can refine your targeting on your performance marketing. You can do more split testing on your creatives, copy, content to see which one converts better. You can also do the same thing like we discussed on your landing pages, product pages, on your checkout pages. So it's truly a full funnel effort. It's not just an effort on the ad dashboards, right? You can do creative testing. So you can test which top of funnel creatives or middle of funnel creatives or bottom of funnel creatives work better for those particular audiences. So you can map those better and hence improve the conversions of each of those stages. So a lot of different ways, of course, that we will not get into all of the ways that you can use to improve CAC, but that just gives you an idea of what kind of things impact this metric. Now, of course, the lower your CAC, the better, right? Now let's look into LTV. So what is the lifetime value of your customers? Okay, this is the calculation. I'll give you examples as well after this. So you have your AOV, which is your average order value, multiplied by the number of orders that you get every year, multiplied by the number of years that you're able to retain a customer. Okay, so let's start with an e-commerce example. Let's say you come on my website, you buy a product from me, and you buy a product for $50. Okay, and you make 2 search orders every year, and you stay with me for 2 years. So $50 is your AOV. Multiplied by 2, that's 100. Multiplied by 2 years, that's 200. So 200 is your lifetime value. Now I want to compare it with my CAC and see, okay, did I acquire this customer for less than 200 or more than 200? Or way less than 200 or way more than 200? Did I burn too much? Did I make too much, right? We'll get into that. But the important thing to note is that this applies to all businesses. So if I made 4 orders from you in a year, and the total revenue you generated from me in that year is $300. So your AOV is 300 divided by 4, multiplied by 4, right? So that's the annual revenue. So if you look at the AOV multiplied by the number of orders per year is basically the annual revenue of that customer, but we are averaging it out per order because then it would be easier to do the math and do forecasting and things like that. Number of years that you retain a customer is hard because if you're a new startup, you don't know how many years you're going to retain the customer, right? So then you get into 2 kinds of ways of calculating LTV. One could be predictive and one could be historical. In the absence of historical data, you might look at the industry data, but it's better to look at predictive analysis because you have a lot of these AI tools and calculators which can do this for you. So if I have been in business, let's say I work with a e-commerce brand and they've been in business for 3 years, I can easily tell that the lifetime of a customer with this business is 1 year. Okay. And in 1 year, they're probably going to place 2 to 3 orders. So on an average, it's 2.5 orders in 1 year. And every order they're going to place is going to be $100 or $120, right? Whatever that number is. So I can now calculate the LTV by AOV multiplied by number of orders per year by number of years, which I know in this case, what the duration is, right? It's 1 year. Now let's move into the agency. I've been running the agency for 12 years. So I have a lot of historical data about how is my average retainer look like in an agency. If I onboard a client, let's say I get a client for $5,000 a month retainer, I can keep them for 1 year, right? So every month they are paying me $5,000. So look at this. The AOV is $5,000. The number of orders per year is 12 because they pay me every month. So 12 multiplied by $5,000. And I can keep them for 2 years, let's say. It's just an example. And yeah, luckily, yes, we have an average retainer of 2 years. So that's great. So 2 multiplied by 12, that's 24 multiplied by 5,000. Can you just imagine the scale at which we have the LTV in an agency? Of course, you have very few clients to work with. And compare it to the CAC. The CAC is usually referrals, usually your network. So CAC is more or less zero in some sense, right? Yeah, of course, you're doing a cold outreach process. Let's say, even if you're doing a cold email outreach, that doesn't cost you much. Even though these tools are expensive, they would probably add up to $300-400 a month, including everything, all of the tools and everything that you use. But your LTV is going to be crazy. Right? Look at Starbucks as an example. They have a very high CAC. I mean, the amount of money that Starbucks invests into ads, sales and marketing will include your ad spend. Just into ads, you'll go crazy. Like, how much money are they spending on acquiring a customer? But if the customer buys a coffee every morning, then the LTV is going to be crazy, right? The lifetime value is going to be even crazier than the CAC. So if you only think of how much money a startup spends, you'll not have the complete picture unless you realize at the back end how much money they are making from these customers. So let's get into, of course, we have the same thing. It changes over time, cohort analysis. Let's get into the methods that can be used to increase the LTV. So things like subscription models, things like cross-selling and upselling, loyalty programs. Again, Starbucks is a good example of loyalty programs. The e-commerce brand that I mentioned is a good example of using cross-sells and upsells. The agency is a good example of a subscription model, or a SaaS business is a good example of a subscription model. And all of these ways you can improve your LTV. Even as a business which is not traditionally supposed to be subscription, you could charge subscriptions. So to give you an example, skincare products can be clubbed into a subscription where you have your monthly skincare routine pack and you sell it every month, right? Of course, there's also considerations like geographical considerations. For example, in India, no one buys subscriptions. Even for the most subscribable products like milk, they don't buy subscriptions, right? So, however, with SaaS products, all kinds of businesses, all kinds of people don't mind buying subscriptions, right? So it also depends on what businesses applies to and so forth. But just to give you an idea of what methods are the best for LTV. Now, so far we've covered the metrics. I know that there is a lot of importance that people give to the ratio. While there are certain benchmarks, I wouldn't go too crazy on the ratio, specifically because it doesn't map to how much time you've been into business. But this is how the ratio looks like. If your lifetime value or your predicted lifetime value of a customer is $100 and your cost of acquisition is $20, that means the ratio is 5x. The ratio of LTV to CAC is 5x. If you acquired a customer for $20, but they made a purchase in their lifetime value comes out to be $2, right? So then 0.1. So the ratio is pretty bad. So anyone could tell that, if your LTV and CAC is less than 1, so you are making less money than what you paid to acquire the customer, right? So after you do all of this calculation, what you come to realize is basically CAC and LTV in simple English is that if I put in $1 into the system, I get X dollars back. So if my LTV to CAC is 3X, if I put $1 into the system, I get $3 back. This is what investors are looking for as a bare minimum, by the way. So LTV to CAC less than 1, you're losing money on each acquisition. LTV to CAC equal to 1, you're breaking even on each acquisition. LTV to CAC greater than 1, you're making money on each acquisition. So now you're in the sort of like there's some hope for you, right? And then LTV to CAC is more than 3 is where we can scale you up, right? You are ready for growth. You are ripe for growth. You're not there yet, but you're ripe for growth. That's LTV by CAC greater than 3. Okay, so if you're equal to 3, that's where I would take you as a client. Think of it that way. What happens before that? You have to experiment a lot. You have to do a lot of stuff, and you might want to hire your own growth team. Right? Those are just some examples. But let's get into common issues now. So not including other costs. So like there's a lot of these other costs, like small costs that come up. Let's say, for example, you buy a tool for auto-generating captions for your Facebook ad video. You get a subscription for that tool. You don't include that. You forget including that. That could be an issue. Understating churn. Maybe you're assuming that your churn is just 10%, but maybe your churn is 20%. So when you're calculating LTV, you also have to consider churn, right? So sometimes you may forget that. You may skip that. So you might say, okay, my agency has 5 customers and this is the LTV, but out of those 5, maybe you have 1 customer dropping out every year. Right? So that's your churn. You have to include your churn in your LTV because that customer who drops out, who churns, while has contributed to your CAC, while has increased your CAC, but has not contributed to your LTV because it's going to churn, right? So or it's contributed less to your LTV. Now, there is one common issue which is with strategy where brands overinvest in acquisition and underinvest in retention, which typically there is a metric to show that. So if your LTV CAC is less than 3, you're typically trying to overinvest in acquisition and underinvest in retention, which is why full funnel growth, full funnel marketing becomes really important. Sometimes you don't account for percentage of old customers coming back from paid channels like Meta and Google. So a lot of times people will say, or e-commerce brands specifically will be like, hey, Google is more profitable because the CAC from Google is lower. But oftentimes what happens is either these people were already searching for your brand search keywords or they were already existing customers coming back from Google. While Meta always seems to have a higher CAC, but it's pretty good at acquisition. That means you're almost always getting new customers in your funnel. So those kinds of things have to be considered as well. The last thing is not counting all customers, because one thing we did not define at all in this video is what is a customer, right? So a customer is anyone who's acquired. So sometimes you may not count people who are acquired but not paying you. So customers does not mean paying customers. Customers mean all customers. If you have a freemium app, let's say, some of the people are on your app using it for free, and some of the people are paying for subscription. You have to count both people who are paying for the subscription and people who are using the app for free. Why? Why do you have to do that? Because you paid for both, right? You paid for both. It's just that some of them didn't contribute to your LTV enough, but they cannot be out of the math because that will give you a very, very wrong image about where your startup stands, right? Similarly, of course, in case of an agency, it's pretty straightforward. A customer is a customer. In case of a e-com, it's also quite straightforward. But if someone enters your e-com website, signs up for your email list, it's still a customer. Maybe they haven't placed an order yet, but you paid for the ads to get this person on your website. So it's also a customer. So counting everyone, paying and non-paying customers. We'll quickly go back to A3R3 funnel to understand this a little bit more. People who are aware are not customers, but everyone else is customers. Acquisition. Once you have a data point, they're a lead. They downloaded something, they put in their email address, they put in their phone numbers, they're all acquired. So from this stage, everyone in the funnel is going to be customers. So everyone who's acquired is a customer. Okay. Finally, notes, the ratio of LTV to CAC we discussed. Remember that acquiring new customers will always cost more than retaining existing ones. And sometimes it's 2, 3, 4 times more. Okay. So it's always cheaper to retain existing customers than to acquire new customers. So at all costs, you want to retain your existing customers. Okay. Not every customer is profitable. Like I said, you have to count all customers, but not every customer is profitable. So while CAC and LTV are great ways to look at averages, great ways to do the math, you also have to do your own 80-20 analysis to understand which customers from that CAC are more profitable and then focus more on that. That's what I mentioned about refining your targeting on your performance marketing to improve your CAC, right? So do that analysis, not just by customer, but by channel, right? Is Google more profitable for you than Facebook? Is email marketing more profitable for you than WhatsApp or SMS or whatever that is? So you can actually go and calculate CAC and LTV for each of those channels and then see which one is better. Of course, organic channels will have a way better ratio of LTV to CAC than paid channels, but they may not have enough control, scale, and scope like the paid channels, right? So organic CAC is going to be lower, the ratio is going to be better. Final thing to consider is the CAC payback period or the timeline. This is a timeline metric. So if you have a CAC and an LTV, but the LTV has been calculated for, let's say the customer stays for 5 years, it takes 5 years for you to get the CAC back. It's too long of a timeline, right? Could be good for some businesses, but for most businesses, you want to get your CAC timeline back within a year. I mean, this is my personal opinion. Of course, different people will have different opinions on the payback period. Some people might want to get the money back in 6 months. Some people want to get the money back in 1 year, 2 years. But timeline is something that we have not considered so far. So add that into your consideration. Overall, the higher your LTV and the lower your CAC, the faster you can grow your business. All of these things that I mentioned, go back, listen to them again, because they have everything that I mentioned has a lot of depth. And in the video itself, I may not have gone into it, but once you think about it, you may find even more depth in all of these things. But eventually, to make things simple, higher LTV, lower CAC, faster you can grow your business. There was one point which I want to expand on a little bit more. which was about the channels, and some channels having a higher CAC but overall being more profitable, because that often happens. And I give you this example of Facebook versus Google. Let's say your Facebook got you new customers, like 10 new customers, and at the same cost, probably Google got you 50 new customers, but the gross margin of the first purchase from Facebook was higher and the repurchases were higher. In that case, your LTV CAC for the first 12 months will be higher for Facebook than Google, even though your CAC could have been higher for Facebook compared to Google. Make sense? So you might have a higher CAC for a particular channel, but the LTV to CAC ratio could be way better when you calculate down the funnel, because the people, I'll give you a very simple example. People searching on Google are more intent driven, so they only buy something that they need, while on Facebook they are more discovery driven, so they'll buy whatever they like on their newsfeed, and in that case they might like 10 other things on your website, and they might come back 5 times that year and purchase again, while the person coming from Google might have been acquired at a lower cost but may never come back again to your website, right? So that's important to understand about CAC and LTV, that you might have a higher CAC from a particular channel, but eventually end up getting very good value for that money during the 12 months, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind as well. So that's all for this video. A lot of discussions we had on CAC and LTV. In case of any questions, let me know, and I can be happy to cover that in another video or an extended version of this video. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Bye.